Welcome to the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management Insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, a podcast here at HR.com, where I am the host, and I do several things at HR.com. You've heard about it before, but today is about my guest, of course, and that is Brent Sommer, who is with TechVentive. Hi, Brian.
Howdy, Brent. Good to be here, and should be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it should be. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to be talking about HR remaining focused on its core corporate objective, even though AI is kind of swirling about and kind of distracting everybody. And I'm looking forward to that. That's a wide-ranging topic. But the way I like to start this with everyone on this podcast is everybody has a story and a passion, especially in this space, I think. When it comes to, why they got into the world of work and all this kind of stuff. And you've been an industry analyst and expert in this space for a long time. What got you into this line of work, Brian? What gets you motivated every day when it comes to this particular market space?
I'd love to say that I woke up one day in my, teens, college years and just decided that's what I want to do. But that's not exactly how my career unfolded. I ended up, of all things, as a finance guy. That's what I am, finance and economics coming out of college. And I ended up going to work for a consulting firm. And I love that kind of work, by the way. But when I got to a certain point, I realized that a big chunk of my job really was around two things. It was around building great teams and organizations, whether it was to deliver on some gigantic project or it was to build a kind of like a very powerful machine for the firm to go out and grab market share and everything else. The skills were pretty much synonymous. In fact, probably the defining moment for me came when I had a 96-person project team. Wrap your head around that. And I had them for 3 years. And somewhere about 9, 10 months into that first year of this, I kind of was thinking in the shower one morning, and it dawned on me that I've got a team, they're whipped into shape, they're focused, they know what they're doing, and I need to change my management work style because I need them to be there all the way to the end of the project. I didn't have a lot of wiggle room to lose folks or anything else, but I needed to get the very best out of them. And so it's not that I was a bad boss. I just decided I need to make some adjustments if I'm going to carry them all the way through to the finish line. And that's exactly what we did. In fact, I then handed the team over to my second in command, and she held on to them for about another year, and they delivered another amazing kind of project at the end of all that. And that's when I guess I would say my attitudes around, and you call it workforce management, but it's really around building teams. It's doing what great HR organizations ought to be doing is to um, put the mechanisms in place that allow people to be the very best they can be and help them do the one thing they're supposed to do, which is help the organization achieve its goals. And when you get all that, get it aligned, you got the right people, then magic things happen. Anyway, that's how I kind of back into it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That you have this background as being sort of the frontline manager, or frontline leader, because I've always thought, that certainly not uniquely to me, but it's crossed my mind many times that, that we talk about HCM as being, very much the part of the charter for HR, and of course it is, but it's wherever an employee interacts with the job, and often that is with their direct managers. So that's pretty interesting.
I haven't talked about this, but I've been working on a book, and at first I was thinking we need to have more empathy, and that we need leaders who are more empathetic. And then I got digging in more about we need to have leaders who provide more psychological and physiological safety for workers, which is another kind of concern. And but when I boil it all down, I mean, I realize in my lifetime I've worked for some total psychos. In fact, I worked for one who was so bad that I bought a book, and I hope this is still correct, but the book's name was Brutal Bosses and Their Prey. And I bought that book just to figure out or decode this individual. And and the book was basically, each chapter was about some new kind of like psychopath or deviant personality. And as I was reading through each one of them, I was getting depressed because most of the time you could tell there was no way to deal with those kind of people other than change employers. And I always thought that's the one big shortcoming. And this is a focus of this book now I'm working on is there are some metrics that should have been put in place in human resource technology. So we find out who the bad bosses really are, except that's not really the focus of a lot of the technology. The technology is to find out who the bad employees are, by whatever measure you use on that. Sorting out the bad bosses, that's something I think a lot of business people don't want to even know who they are, because then they have a very expensive, difficult problem to replace out that individual. Anyway, sorry for the sidebar, but I do care about, if you will, let's call it the social science aspect of this, as well as the nuts and bolts stuff. And you and I have been in enough vendor briefings where, I'm the kind of guy that's going to ask the really rough, tough question or the highly technical one. But I get the soft side issues, and they are significant. Anyway, sorry for
Yeah.
that departure.
Actually, I think it's really relevant, and I'm glad you shared it, and I'm looking forward to reading that book. And I'm going to try to find that other book that you found many years ago, just because it
Well,
sounds interesting.
yeah, it's like
Course.
reading that book my view is it was kind of like being a first person participant in a horror movie. And, because what I didn't tell you, the punchline on this is I found out that my boss had 3 of these horrible pathologies going on at the same time. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But anyway,
Yeah, that sounds like that's a little bit too much for psychotherapy, I think. So anyway,
mm,
but it's really interesting because that and a couple things crossed my mind, and I think this actually is a good segue. That viewing the workforce merely as tools for your own vision, and while they are, in a sense, viewing them that way as opposed to engaging with them and viewing them as other people. I mean, that's I
mm,
think it really gets to the nut of things. So these are a lot of sort of perennial issues that we've dealt with for a long time in the world of work, and HR has its role in this, right? And it's really interesting as technology, as sort of the attention or the focus or people's awareness of technology and business has risen, has increased, right? It's really interesting that we've also commensurately and in parallel sort of increased our awareness of these issues. I don't remember everybody talking about this in the 70s or 80s. Well, in the 70s, I was really, really young. I wasn't paying attention to HCM, but I mean, thinking about the 90s and the 80s and whenever people weren't talking about this as much as they are today. So these are all old, well-known issues. Why focus on these now?
because I think in the rush to embrace certain things of late, whether it's uh, Well, you've seen it. After the pandemic, we had a lot of people who were very used to working by themselves at home. The amount of interaction they were necessarily having with others really fell off the charts quite a bit. We've got a whole generation of workers who started using digital tools like iPads. I mean, it makes my heart sink sometimes when I'm like going through the grocery store and there's some kid in the child seat in the front of the grocery basket with an iPod and just playing video games. And the kid's like 3, 2 years old, something like that. You know, for anecdotes, I'll give you this one. So I had a nephew and my sister and brother, they were all riding with me and they'd come up to visit us one time. We decided we're going to go check out some antique stores up in Wisconsin. So we left out of Chicago and we're driving along. And this kid, from the moment he got in the back seat of my car, he had headphones on and was playing with some PS2 or whatever, some kind of video game in the back seat. Hadn't said a word to anybody the whole time. So after about 2 hours of driving up into the Wisconsin Dairyland, I just pulled over on the side of the road and left the engine running. We're just sitting there idling. And eventually my sister's like, "What are we doing here, Brian?" I go, "Well, I would say we're enjoying this beautiful bucolic countryside here with the rolling hills and the Holstein cattle out in the pastures. But just wait." And then all of a sudden, my nephew pulls off his headphones and he's like, "What are we doing here, Uncle Brian?" And I go, "We're waiting for you to learn how to engage in an adult conversation." And I point out to him that we were about 55 miles north of Chicago, and that will be a long walk if he wants to play video game and walk back to our place if he knew how to find it, or he could now put that game aside and interact with us and learn how to be a better conversationalist with adults. So we've got a generation of people who are such digital natives that their people skills and their ability to read people, to empathize with others, is constrained. It's not. So we've got that kind of component going on in the workforce. And then we have the dark side of the workforce going on. People who are embracing citizen AI tools and other kinds of new technologies to do things that really screw up organizations and move the organization in places that it really doesn't want to be. And I think that's why we need to have these more holistic kind of conversations that talk about the people, talk about what's going on up here, talk about what they've been doing, and also talk about how they interact with others at work. And these are all relevant items today.
What are some of those? I agree with you. It is worrisome, and 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 I've been following, just like you. I've been following sort of this AI encroachment, or an infiltration of the world of work, and we have, agentic AI, AI that can do things that people can do that, very short time ago we really thought was not necessarily possible, right? And it's sort of
Mhm.
it's disrupting our whole notion of the meaning of work, excuse me, the meaning in work. And and from a more sort of, meat and potatoes standpoint, it's contributing to, depending on who you talk to, is depending on it's eating into the availability of jobs, especially entry level jobs. So what are some of the examples of these types of AI uses that are sort of, amplifying and exacerbating these problems, and maybe, shutting some people out of the workplace?
So let's I'm going to start with a recruiting example, even though I know you're more on the payroll side of things, but this will get us going. And I've got some others I'm going to touch on. And the recruiting side, probably one of the most fascinating things that I've been talking about with audiences for 2.5+ years is when citizen AI tools are being used to really pervert what recruiting and recruiting technology can or should be doing. And in particular, what's happening, and there's a great academic study that came out recently with everyone using AI to perfect their resume, to get it to line up perfectly with the job description, what it does is it means that everyone's application or resume starts to look the same. And I've been talking about this, like I said, for years, that this was going to happen. Now, when that does, what this academic study showed is that companies are now that are now looking at these very homogeneous and highly perfected resumes, and they can't differentiate one employee or applicant versus another. So what you end up with is an environment where HR is now hiring about 15% more bottom quintile people than they used to. And of the high potential people, they're hiring about 14% less of them because everything got kind of squished together, blended like an oleo, and there is no differentiation. And that's because what AI does is it strips out the more unique stuff that people have, and it makes it harder for someone doing a screen or a program doing a screen to really find out who probably really does know this stuff, because that's why they're talking about something that's maybe more specific, more arcane, more unique to someone with expert knowledge.
What-
Now,
Can I just
there are
interject
other.
for a second? Brian,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. You just made me think, and I just want to interject a little bit here because it's really super interesting. Is that it's also kind of marginalizing the novelty factor. There's a novelty
Correct.
factor in hiring people. You want somebody that brings something novel to the to whatever the challenge is at hand. You don't want just sort of somebody's like everybody else. And it's really interesting also that that it's this effect is also not unlike the effect of a lot of operational efficiency efforts, right?
Mhm.
You encounter, a downturn in the market, you take a butcher knife to the workforce as opposed to a scalpel, and you kind of get rid of a bunch of people that maybe you shouldn't have because they might have had some sort of enough impact on the organization moving forward that might have enabled it to weather the storm. So I think there's a lot of to unpack there.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Okay, so I I've probably can spot you 15, 20 years easily of additional experience, and that's just a nature of our respective birth dates more than anything else. But I've seen a lot over the years, and this problem you're describing is quite true. There was a great story recently about how Salesforce had to admit that they shouldn't have fired 4,000 or 5,000 of their customer service people out of their 9,000 staff because, as it turned out, maybe the AI couldn't quite do exactly what they thought it was going to be able to do. There are other examples of companies that announced big layoffs, claiming that AI was going to be the saving grace on that, and then turn around and instead of rehiring people that they mistakenly let go, they've decided to go with outsourcing instead, or maybe even offshoring some of these positions. Personally, I think that any executive that does that with so little knowledge of what AI can or can't do is guilty of like executive malpractice and probably should be tossed out, of that role for having done that because it creates all kinds of downstream peripheral damage to the company. It hurts their employment brand. It hurts their reputation, period, in the market. And it makes the executive look pretty stupid. And so, with all those kind of things in mind, the only upside I can see on these things is there might have been a short-term stock price pop because, oh, this company looks modern. They're using AI now and agentic AI, and they're going to get rid of headcount, even though they're going to have to claw all of that back in probably within 30 to 90 days. So that's another one of these examples where the new technology is not well understood. Its limitations are not really well known. And um, I think I don't know why companies want to rush to such significant changes with such an unproven kind of technology in the commercial marketplace today.
It's it's It is worrisome, and it makes you think, and a couple of things. One is sort of granular. maybe a couple other examples outside of the recruiting realm where this creates an issue. But then the bigger question that I kind of hoping that we can get to here is, what is HR's, core corporate objective? And, how can HR keep its eye on the ball and remain relevant in this sort of intentional way, given all this stuff swirling about?
Great question. I get like you, I get a lot of phone calls every day, and they're kind of the broken record one is someone calling in saying we probably need to get some new HR software. The question is, what do we really need, or why should I go look at particular products? What this really speaks to, and this is the magic word, cosmopolitan. A lot of the buyers of technology are not very cosmopolitan. They are not very aware of all of the new technologies, the products, the limitations, the strengths, whatever, the stuff out there. The first step, I think, for a lot of organizations is they've got to get out and play in traffic. I don't care if you do brown bag seminars, things, lunches, one day a week, you've got a vendor going to come in and do even if it's a podcast, whatever, or a webinar kind of demo and show what the state of the art is. There's another challenge, which is so much of, particularly in the SMB market and down, they just don't have the people, the skills, or anything else, the availability to really get cosmopolitan. That's something nobody really talks about. I mean, you think about it. I used a slide years ago. I haven't used it in a long time. It's like a pie, a pizza slice deal. It looks like there's like 20 slices of this thing. And it's all the things that HR is responsible for. Everything from payroll and time and attendance, and they've got all the onboarding tasks and offboarding tasks. You go on forever on this thing. Then you ask, how many HR employees are there in like a SMB company? You'll find out like 3 or 8. And you go, they're not giving full attention to all of the slices of the pie. Then where are they supposed to get this extra time to become experts on AI and AI technology and everything else? And then let's add the really big, the mother of all problems here right now is they're being expected to redesign work for every department in the company. Now, last time I checked, HR is good at maybe figuring out how to put together a job description for a job board. They might be able to do some things to help with an org structure, possibly, but redesigning work. I mean, fundamentally redesigning it, thinking that huge pieces of work are going to be done by an agent is not necessarily in the skill set of a lot of HR departments today. So there's an education gap in HR that I think is significant.
You're so right, and you're like walking me right into what I'm about to say, and that is, the role of HR. HR has lost sight of its fundamental imperative on one hand, it's lost sight of its fundamental imperative. That's sort of its evergreen, perennial imperative, right? Amidst all the confusion and distraction, right? At the same time, it has always been mired in this sort of transactional stuff or this lower level stuff or whatever. And we keep hearing about how HR needs to become more sort of I'm a mind cramp right now, but more leadership focused, more is sort of focused on higher level things. In a previous life, I used to refer to it to concrete versus abstract. HCM. There's all sorts of other ways to look at it, right? But what you're talking about now is, and this has occurred to me as well, is now's the time. That there is sort of a clear and present danger that a lot of that transactional work is going to maybe eventually go away because of advances in technology. And then what is HR going to have left to do to remain as a thing, right? And there's so that's the danger piece of it, but also sort of the Chinese proverb or whatever, there's an opportunity in danger, right? So there's an opportunity to really embrace and step into this leadership role, to remain, not just to remain relevant, but to actually become indispensable?
I'll believe that's happening when I see budgets change and when I see HR able to hire additional headcount. HR, unfortunately, I'm not trying to be a downer here. They're not the most loved group in the executive committee in a lot of companies. In fact, for the last several years, they're the ones who get yelled at probably the most because there's always some frustrated executive screaming and hollering like, "I don't want to hear about the war for talent because you still haven't found me like the 3 forklift operators we need on the loading dock," and we've had that, when are you going to fill that requisition? It's been open now for, like 3 months. And, they're unloved, they're, understaffed, they don't have a lot of budget, and they sure don't have the time to do a lot of things that are asked of them just, as of, let's say, last year. You add all this new AI-driven kind of change and the need to restructure work, and you gotta ask yourself, Who's gonna do all this? What happens to it?" And yes, I could put some agentic technology in the middle of a number of HR processes and I could make HR somewhat more productive, but am I going to be able to, even if I can free up some headcount, doesn't necessarily mean I have the great leaders and that, who are going to be able to drive the next generation, what HR is all about. It's a it's challenging, and I think if you're the kind of HR leader who thinks that it's all about, getting some attaboy software, giving people, you know, stars and stickers and all that kind of stuff for doing a great job, that's not really the nature of what HR is gonna really need to be focused on for the foreseeable future as work continues to reinvent itself. And
What,
it they've gotta be the leader on this.
how can they do it? I mean, that's $1 million question, and I don't think we're gonna have like the silver bullet answer right now. But we've been talking about it for so long. We have so many impediments that are kind of holding HR back. But which HR departments are going to actually be successful in stepping into this new greater role and sort of persistent?
Uh, it's gonna take It's gonna take an HR organization that's got a leader who's not necessarily what a lot of HR people are, who are warm, charismatic kind of individuals who may be really technology thin on their expertise. I think this is gonna I'm not saying there isn't a role for that kind of or need for that kind of person, but you're gonna need someone who's really gonna have to have an incredible ability to move the money around, whatever, and find a way to get some of the access to some of the new technology and some new skills, and at least take a pilot piece of the company and figure out how it's going to get re-engineered. This means they have to be able to work with IT to find out where's IT going to be deploying and using some like new technology and AI. And then what you're going to do is you need to come up with at least one initial success and show how you're going to reimagine what work looks like in some corner of the firm, and then that gets the executive leadership attention. And once they get that, then the executives will just keep handing over more budget and more headcount to the HR and IT groups to continue to push that, forward to roll that out in other parts of the company. If they don't do that, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. Is companies are not going to wait for like HR and HR leadership to wake up and deliver on this. They're instead going to start building greenfield sites or doing partnerships with other companies who have already done some of this stuff and figured it out. You either got to decide, am I going to be a champion for the new ways of doing work, or am I going to be a caretaker for the way work used to get done? That's the decision.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned IT. And you took the words right out of my mouth. There's sort of a little side sort of thing that's happening that I've noticed. That there's a growing trend where people with an IT background are starting to take some leadership roles in some organizations when it comes to an HR standpoint. And it's happening in other silos of the enterprise as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that. What's really interesting though about what you mentioned is that it's kind of counterintuitive. It makes total sense when you actually explain it, right? But at first blush, it seems counterintuitive. No, we need a charismatic leader who's all about people, that's going to be able to persuade leadership that people matter and all this kind of stuff. No, it's going to take somebody who understands that and agrees with it, but has a different set of skills, has that sort of ruthless set of skills, that's able to move their money around, able to kind of just actually have an impact and siphon some of those funds over to HR so that they can find more time, so that they have the mental white space to actually do what they should be doing all along.
Hmm. Well, maybe for another podcast, we should talk about some of the HR leaders that need to go bye-bye. And for that, whenever we have that conversation, I'll tell you a hair-raising story about an chief HR officer confrontation I had at a software show that was definitely one for the books. But yeah, I think what we are in now is that I'm not suggesting, there have been 3 or 4 companies that have tried like merging IT and HR together. I'm not a gigantic fan of that because of the regulatory issues alone, just in things like payroll and EEO and other kinds of compliance stuff and privacy and so forth in HR are significant and have some uniqueness of there. And IT is dealing with a whole list of other kind of problem children that they have to deal with as well. I'm not sure merging them is the right way to go, but there is an opportunity for the two to become allies and go approach some aspects of the firm and knock them out. I will say, though, that I think these 2 groups have a great alignment opportunity because if you're a company that's got major, like say, manufacturing operations, how much you can redefine work is somewhat limited at the person level because most of the stuff will be machine integration and automation, not necessarily people. Um, and IT and HR definitely will have the data, the metrics and so forth to deal with. Remember, we're past that. Data is the new oil. Now it's all into digitalized information. Everything else is really where things are going. Anyway, I think we've kept people plenty on this. Anyway.
Well, I am looking forward to hearing that story, and we should do another episode where we talk about the HR kinds of HR people that need to go. But you're right, we have reached the limit here on time. But Brian, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. This has been really illuminating, and I knew it would be.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at HR.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.